At 0430 hours on April 27, 1962, Lieutenant Roy Boehm lay motionless on the ocean floor, 60 feet beneath the surface, 300 yards from the Cuban coastline. Above him, two Soviet-built patrol boats circled, their propellers churning the water into violent eddies that threatened to rip the rebreather from his mouth. 38 years old, 20 years in the Navy, commander of a unit that officially did not exist. The unit was called SEAL Team 1, sea, air, land, 6 months old, 48 men, all volunteers, all trained by Boehm personally, all experts at killing quietly, swimming invisibly, and operating where conventional forces could not go. Tonight's mission was simple in concept, suicidal in execution. Swim to Cuban shores, map the beaches, identify defensive positions, assess whether American forces could land an invasion force if President Kennedy ordered one. Do this undetected. Return alive. The patrol boats had appeared 3 minutes after Boehm's team left the submarine USS Threadfin, surfacing just long enough for 8 SEALs to slip into the dark water. Someone had seen something, a periscope wake, a shadow on the surface, a disturbance in the water. The Cubans knew Americans were out here. Boehm pressed himself flatter against the sandy bottom. His rebreather recycled his breath, producing no bubbles that would betray his position. The equipment was experimental. It had failed twice during training. One SEAL had nearly drowned when the carbon dioxide scrubber malfunctioned, but conventional scuba gear would have left a trail of bubbles visible for hundreds of yards. Rebreathers were the only option for covert insertion. The propeller noise grew louder. One boat was heading directly toward Boehm's position. He could feel the pressure waves pushing against his body. The boat was doing a search pattern, crisscrossing the area where the SEALs had entered the water. To Boehm's left, barely visible in the darkness, Petty Officer First Class Bill Brumuller lay motionless. To his right, Chief Rudy Bosch. Both men were among the first SEALs Boehm had recruited. Both had survived his brutal training program. Both understood that movement meant death. The patrol boat passed overhead. The propeller was so close, Boehm could have reached up and touched the hull. The noise was deafening, even underwater. Then it was moving away, continuing its search pattern. Boehm waited, counted to 60, waited more. The patrol boats continued circling, but they were moving farther from the insertion point. The Cubans had not found the SEALs. Not yet. Boehm checked his compass, then signaled his team. They began swimming toward shore, staying deep, moving slowly to avoid creating disturbances on the surface. The mission would continue. Failure was not acceptable. The president himself had ordered this reconnaissance. Roy Boehm did not fail presidents. But then, Roy Boehm had been preparing for this moment since he was 18 years old, since the day the Navy sent him into hell to retrieve the dead. 20 years earlier, April 1942, Pearl Harbor. Seaman Roy Boehm stood on the deck of the salvage barge looking at the oil-stained water above the USS Arizona. The battleship had been underwater for 4 months. 1,177 sailors were still entombed inside. The Navy needed bodies recovered for burial. They needed ammunition retrieved before it corroded and became unstable. They needed someone willing to dive into a submerged tomb filled with decomposing corpses. Boehm was 18 years old. He had joined the Navy 3 months after Pearl Harbor, lying about his age to enlist at 17. He had volunteered for diving school because it paid extra. Now he understood why they paid extra. "You'll go in through the forward hatch," the diving supervisor said. "Follow the rope. Don't touch anything unless we tell you to. Don't look at anything. You don't need to see. Get in, get what we need, get out." Boehm nodded. He had been diving for 6 weeks. All training dives, clean water-controlled conditions. This would be different. They fitted him with the Mark V diving helmet, 84 pounds of copper and brass. The faceplate was small, limiting visibility. Air hoses connected the helmet to a compressor on the barge. Lead weights attached to his belt, and boots kept him from floating. The suit was canvas and rubber, sealed tight. Once underwater, he would be completely dependent on the air hose and the men managing it from the surface. Boehm stepped off the barge and descended through the oil slick. Visibility dropped to 0 within seconds. He could see nothing but brown murk. His gloved hand found the rope, and he followed it down, counting seconds, estimating depth, 40 feet, 50 feet. His boots hit metal, the deck of the Arizona. The rope led toward the superstructure. Boehm followed it, moving slowly, The water began to clear slightly as he descended below the worst of the oil. He could see perhaps 10 feet ahead now, enough to navigate, enough to see things he did not want to see. The forward hatch was partially open. Boehm's instructions were to enter, proceed to the ammunition magazine, and begin bringing up shells that could be safely recovered. He pulled himself through the hatch opening inside the ship. Darkness was absolute beyond the beam of his underwater lamp. The light revealed twisted metal, collapsed bulkheads, debris floating in the water current, and bodies. They were everywhere, some still at their battle stations, some floating free, moving with the current in a slow, terrible dance. 4 months underwater had transformed them. Boehm's training had not prepared him for this. Nothing could prepare someone for this. He forced himself to keep moving. Follow the rope, complete the mission. Don't think about what you're seeing. The rope led deeper into the ship. Please like this video. This will help us share more forgotten stories like this. If you're not subscribed yet, please click subscribe. Boehm squeezed through a narrow passage between collapsed metal. His helmet scraped against the overhead. For a moment he was stuck, wedged between metal that had been crushed by the explosion that killed this ship. Panic hit him. He was trapped inside a tomb, surrounded by dead men, with limited air and no way to free himself. He jerked backward, desperate to escape. His helmet slammed against metal. The impact rang through his skull. The panic passed, training reasserted itself. He forced his breathing to slow, conserved his air, thought through the problem. He twisted his body, found a different angle, pushed forward instead of back. The gap widened. He was through. The ammunition magazine was directly ahead. Shells were stored in racks, many still intact. Boehm began the process of rigging shells for recovery, attached the lift line, signaled the surface, wait while they winched it up. Repeat. He worked for 40 minutes inside the Arizona, 40 minutes surrounded by the dead. When he finally emerged through the hatch and began his ascent, he was shaking, not from cold, from something else. On the surface, the diving supervisor removed Boehm's helmet. Boehm immediately vomited over the side of the barge. The supervisor nodded. First time's the worst. You'll go back down in 20 minutes. Boehm went back down. And again for 3 weeks, he dove into the Arizona, recovering bodies and ammunition. Each dive taught him something about fear, about controlling it, about operating in conditions that would break most men. The Arizona dives shaped everything that came after. They taught Boehm that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to function despite it. They taught him that the human body could endure far more than the mind believed possible. They taught him that some missions required sending men into situations where death was probable, but completion was necessary. 20 years later, these lessons would inform how he trained the SEALs, how he selected them, how he pushed them beyond what they thought they could survive. But first, Roy Boehm had to learn what it meant to face death in combat. October 11, 1942, South Pacific, Guadalcanal. Boehm stood at his battle station on the USS Duncan, a Fletcher-class destroyer, as the ship went to general quarters. Japanese naval forces were approaching. The Battle of Cape Esperance was about to begin. Boehm was 19 years old now. He had been promoted to fireman first class. His battle station was in the forward magazine, passing ammunition to the 5-inch guns. It was perhaps the most dangerous position on the ship. If a shell penetrated the magazine, the explosion would kill everyone instantly. At 23:40 hours, the Duncan opened fire. The night erupted with muzzle flashes and tracer rounds. Japanese ships were everywhere, more than American intelligence had predicted. The Duncan was engaging multiple targets simultaneously. At 23:52 hours, a Japanese shell hit the Duncan amidships. The explosion tore through the hull below the waterline. Boehm felt the ship shudder. Damage reports began flooding in. Engine room flooding. Fire in the galley, casualties mounting. The Duncan kept firing. American destroyers did not withdraw from gun battles. They closed and engaged. At 00:14 hours, 2 more Japanese shells hit the Duncan. One struck the bridge, killing the captain and most of the command staff. The other hit the forward engine room. The ship began listing to starboard. At 00:23 hours, the order came to abandon ship. The Duncan was sinking, all hands to evacuate. Boehm made it to the main deck as the ship rolled further to starboard. Men were jumping into the water, some with life jackets, some without. Japanese ships were still firing. Not at the Duncan now, but at other American vessels. Shells were landing in the water near the sinking destroyer. Boehm jumped. The water was warm. Oil covered the surface. Boehm swam away from the ship, trying to put distance between himself and the suction that would occur when the Duncan went under. He found a piece of debris, a wooden hatch cover, and grabbed it. Someone else grabbed the same piece of wood from the opposite side. Boehm looked across the debris and froze. It was a Japanese sailor young, maybe Boehm's age, also swimming away from a sinking ship. The man's eyes widened in recognition. Enemy, they stared at each other across 3 feet of water, both exhausted, both terrified, both clinging to the same piece of wood that might keep them alive until rescue came. Boehm's hand moved toward the knife on his belt. The Japanese sailor's hand moved toward his own knife. They both stopped. Neither drew their weapon. The Japanese sailor said something in Japanese. Boehm didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Too tired to fight. Too scared to let go of the wood. The man gestured to one end of the debris. "You take that side. I'll take this side. We don't have to kill each other tonight." Boehm nodded. They drifted apart slightly, each maintaining their grip on the wood but maximizing distance from each other. For the next 3 hours, they floated together, neither speaking, neither attacking, just trying to survive. Dawn came. American ships were searching for survivors. The Japanese sailor saw them approaching and released the wood. He swam away, back toward where Japanese forces were regrouping. Boehm watched him go. Then he waved at the approaching American vessel. But before rescue arrived, Boehm witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 30 yards away, Seaman Daniel Dubiel was floating in the water, holding onto a piece of wreckage. Dubiel was from Boehm's division. They had gone through boot camp together. The shark came from below. Enormous, Boehm saw the shadow rise through the water, saw the massive head break the surface, saw Dubiel's eyes go wide with terror. Then Dubiel was gone. Just gone. Pulled under in one violent motion. The water churned red. Debris scattered. Then nothing. Boehm screamed Dubiel's name. Other sailors in the water began screaming, thrashing, trying to swim toward rescue boats. The thrashing attracted more sharks. The rescue boat reached Boehm 7 minutes later. They pulled him from the water. He was one of 68 Duncan survivors. 195 crewmen died. Dubiel's body was never recovered. That night taught Boehm 3 things. First, that enemy soldiers were often just frightened men trying to survive, same as Americans. Second, that the ocean was more dangerous than any human enemy. Third, that luck mattered more than skill when death came from below. The Duncan survivors were reassigned to other ships. Boehm continued to serve through World War II, participating in multiple Pacific operations. He survived. He earned commendations. He learned to fight. But World War II was conventional warfare. Massive fleets, thousands of men, industrial-scale killing. By the time the war ended, Boehm had concluded that the next war would be different, smaller, more precise, requiring different skills and different men. Korea proved him right. November 1950, Hungnam, North Korea. Lieutenant Junior Grade Roy Boehm stood on the bridge of the USS Worcester as the cruiser provided fire support for the Marine retreat from the chosen reservoir. Chinese forces had overrun American positions. 10,000 Marines were fighting their way to the coast through overwhelming enemy numbers. The Worcester's 8-inch guns fired continuously for 16 hours, targeting Chinese positions identified by forward observers. Boehm coordinated fire missions, calculating trajectories, adjusting for wind and temperature. The math was complex but mechanical. Input the variables, fire the gun, repeat. By the 3rd hour, Boehm understood the futility. They were firing thousands of shells at an enemy that simply absorbed the casualties and kept coming. Chinese forces accepted losses that would break any Western army. They had infinite manpower. America did not. This was not a war America could win through conventional means. Not against an enemy willing to sacrifice millions. The Korean War would end in stalemate, proving that massive firepower and technological superiority could not guarantee victory against a determined opponent with numerical superiority. Boehm watched the Marines evacuate and understood something fundamental. The next war would not be about big guns and massive armies. It would be about small units operating behind enemy lines, disrupting supply chains, assassinating leaders, destroying infrastructure. precision over power, quality over quantity. When he returned from Korea, Boehm began volunteering for every unconventional warfare course the Navy offered. Demolitions, hand-to-hand combat, foreign languages, lock-picking. He studied insurgency tactics used by communist forces. He read Mao's writings on guerrilla warfare. He learned to think like an unconventional warrior. The Navy didn't quite know what to do with him. He was too aggressive for conventional assignments, too insubordinate for staff positions, too effective to discharge. They made him an underwater demolition team instructor, training the frogmen who would clear beaches before amphibious assaults. That is where he was in 1961, when President Kennedy called March 1961. Washington, D.C. Boehm stood at attention in the Pentagon briefing room, trying not to show his confusion about why he had been summoned to Navy headquarters. Lieutenant commanders did not get called to the Pentagon unless they were being promoted or court-martialed. Boehm's personnel file suggested court-martial was more likely. A rear admiral entered the room. "At ease, Lieutenant. You're not in trouble. Actually, you are, but not today." The admiral explained that President Kennedy wanted a new type of naval commando unit, something beyond the underwater demolition teams. UDT cleared beaches. The new unit would do everything: direct action, reconnaissance, sabotage, assassination if necessary, operate from sea, air, or land. Hence the name SEALs. "We need someone to build this unit from scratch," the admiral said. "Someone who understands unconventional warfare. Someone who is not afraid to break rules. Someone the Pentagon brass will hate but who will get results. Your file shows 14 disciplinary actions, 3 recommendations for court-martial, but it also shows consistently outstanding combat performance and an ability to complete missions other officers consider impossible. You're exactly the kind of officer we need to create something that shouldn't exist within the military bureaucracy." Boehm absorbed this. "What authority would I have?" "Complete. You'll report directly to the Chief of Naval Operations. Your unit will be separate from normal command structures. You'll recruit who you want, train how you want. Equip yourselves however you see fit." "When do I start?" "Yesterday." Building SEAL Team 1 took 6 months of the most intense effort of Boehm's career. He had to create everything from nothing: training curriculum, equipment specifications, selection standards, operational doctrine. First, recruitment. Boehm needed men who were physically exceptional, mentally tough, and professionally competent. But more than that, he needed men who thought for themselves, men who could operate independently behind enemy lines with no support, men who would question orders if those orders were tactically stupid. The Navy hated that last requirement. Military discipline required following orders without question. Boehm disagreed. "I need men who will tell me when I'm wrong. I need men who will find solutions when the plan fails. I need men who think, not robots who follow orders." He recruited from UDT teams, looking for men with actual combat experience. He wanted men who had been shot at and didn't freeze, men who had seen friends die and kept functioning, men who had faced fear and mastered it. 48 men made the first SEAL team. Most were in their 20s, several were in their 30s. All were volunteers who understood that training would be brutal and missions would be suicidal. Boehm designed the training to be impossible, not difficult, impossible. He wanted to see who would find ways to complete impossible tasks. If you can't handle training, you'll die in combat. Better to quit here than fail when your team depends on you. The training lasted 6 months, physical conditioning that broke most candidates, swimming with tanks of air underwater for hours, long-distance ocean swims in rough water, combat diving in zero visibility, demolitions training with live explosives, parachute jumps into water at night. Hand-to-hand combat training that left men bloody and bruised. But Boehm added something the Navy didn't teach: criminal skills. "You need to learn how to break into buildings," he told his SEALs. "You need to know how to hotwire vehicles. You need to understand how thieves think, because half your missions will require acting like criminals." He brought in former criminals as instructors. A reformed car thief taught hot wiring. A former burglar taught lock-picking. A retired forger taught document creation. The Navy legal department objected. Boehm ignored them. "In combat, you do what works. I don't care if it is legal or approved or in the field manual. I care if it keeps my men alive and completes the mission." Equipment was another battle. Navy procurement wanted to issue standard gear. Boehm refused. I need equipment that works, not equipment that some contractor sold to a Navy purchasing officer who has never been in combat. The breaking point came when a Navy engineer ordered diving rebreathers that Boehm knew were inadequate. The engineer refused to cancel the order. These are approved equipment, you'll use what you're issued. Boehm invited the engineer to the training pool. Show me how they work. I'm not a diver. Then you shouldn't be buying dive equipment. Boehm grabbed the engineer and threw him into the pool. The man couldn't swim. SEALs jumped in and rescued him, but the message was clear. Boehm would not accept equipment that could get his men killed. The incident resulted in Boehm's third recommendation for court-martial. Before charges could be filed, Boehm was summoned to the White House, May 1962. Oval Office President John F. Kennedy sat behind the resolute desk, reading Boehm's personnel file. Boehm stood at attention, unsure whether he was about to receive a medal or a court. Marshal Kennedy looked up. You threw a Navy engineer into a swimming pool. Yes, Mr. President. Why? He was buying equipment that would kill my men. He refused to listen. I needed to demonstrate why his equipment was inadequate, by attempting to drown him. My men pulled him out. He was never in danger much. Kennedy smiled slightly. Your file is remarkable. Commander, 3 recommendations for court-martial, 14 disciplinary actions, and consistent reports that you're one of the most effective combat officers in the Navy. Your superiors don't know whether to promote you or imprison you. I'm familiar with the dilemma, sir. Kennedy leaned back. I need the SEALs operational immediately. The situation in Cuba is deteriorating. I may need to order an invasion within months. Before that happens, I need to know if our forces can land on Cuban beaches. I need reconnaissance, detailed intelligence that aerial photography cannot provide. Can your SEALs do that? Yes, sir. How soon? Give me 72 hours, Kennedy nodded. You have presidential authority to acquire any equipment you need for this mission. Any equipment, I don't care where you get it or how much it costs. Report directly to the NATO. No other approvals required. And Commander, yes, sir. I didn't vote for myself either, but I'd die for this country. I need men who feel the same way. Boehm understood. You have them, sir. Every one of my SEALs would die for you, not because you're president, because you're asking us to do something that matters. That conversation gave Boehm what he called presidential priority. He could now bypass the entire Pentagon bureaucracy. He used it immediately. Within 24 hours, Boehm had acquired equipment the Navy would never approve. Black market R-15 rifles before they were military standard, experimental rebreathers from a civilian diving company, high-frequency radios from an intelligence agency that officially didn't exist, explosives that weren't in any Navy inventory. The mission brief was simple. 8 SEALs would deploy from a submarine 300 yards off the Cuban coast. They would swim to shore, map the beaches, photograph defensive positions, collect sand samples to determine if the beaches could support tanks, and return to the submarine, all within 6 hours. All undetected. If captured, they would be executed as spies. Kennedy could not acknowledge their existence. The mission did not officially exist. Neither did SEAL Team 1. Boehm briefed his men. This is the mission SEALs were created for. High risk, high value. If we fail, the president doesn't have intelligence for invasion planning. If we succeed, we prove that SEALs can operate where no other force can go. Also, if we succeed, this unit survives. If we fail, the Pentagon shuts down SEAL Team 1 and sends you all back to regular Navy. So don't fail. April 27, 1962, 0400 hours, 300 yards off the Cuban coast. Boehm led his 7-man team off the submarine USS Threadfin. The water was bathwater warm. Visibility was poor. Cuban patrol boats were active in the area, forcing the submarine to surface farther from shore than planned. The team swam in a tactical formation, Boehm on point, 2 men on each flank. 2 in the rear, they stayed at 20 feet depth, using compasses for navigation. No lights, no communication except hand signals. At 0430, the patrol boats appeared. 2 boats moving fast, heading directly toward the SEAL insertion point. Someone had detected something. The Cubans were searching. Boehm signaled his team to go deep and stay still. They descended to 60 feet and pressed against the ocean floor. The rebreathers were functioning, producing no bubbles, but if anyone's equipment failed, bubbles would mark their position and draw Cuban attention. The patrol boats circled overhead for 11 minutes. Boehm counted the propeller revolutions, estimating speed and course. The Cubans were conducting a systematic search pattern. They knew someone was out here. Finally, the boats moved away, continuing their search farther from the SEAL position. Boehm waited another 5 minutes, then signaled to continue the mission. The team reached shore at 05:15 hours. They emerged from the water in a defensive posture, weapons ready, expecting contact. The beach was empty, no guards visible, no defensive positions immediately apparent. For the next 4 hours, the SEALs conducted their reconnaissance. They photographed fortifications, mapped defensive positions, collected sand samples, measured water depth at various points offshore, identified locations suitable for amphibious landing craft. They discovered that the Cubans had fortified the beaches far more heavily than American intelligence estimated. Machine gun positions every 50 yards, artillery bunkers positioned to cover the entire landing zone, mines buried in the sand, anti-boat obstacles in the surf zone. An invasion here would be costly, possibly prohibitively costly, but now Kennedy would have accurate intelligence to make that decision. At 0900 hours, the SEALs withdrew to the water and began their swim back to the submarine. The return trip took 90 minutes. They reached the thread fin at 10:30 hours, climbed aboard, and submerged immediately. Mission success. No casualties, no detection, perfect execution. Boehm submitted his report directly to the Chief of Naval Operations, who forwarded it to Kennedy. The intelligence contributed to Kennedy's decision-making during the Cuban Missile Crisis, 6 months later. When Kennedy opted for a naval blockade instead of invasion, part of that decision was based on Boehm's reconnaissance, showing how heavily defended Cuban beaches were. SEAL Team 1 had proven its value. The unit would continue to exist. Boehm's unconventional approach had worked. But the real test was coming. Vietnam, December 1963, Mekong Delta, South Vietnam. Boehm stood in a small boat moving slowly up a narrow canal in the Mekong Delta. Jungle pressed close on both sides. This was Viet Cong territory. American conventional forces avoided these waterways. The VC controlled the rivers at night. Boehm was here to change that. His mission was to train South Vietnamese naval commandos in riverine warfare. How to conduct ambushes from boats, how to raid VC supply lines, how to turn the waterways from VC highways into killing zones. But training foreign forces was frustrating. Language barriers, cultural differences, equipment shortages, political interference. The South Vietnamese officers were more concerned with corruption and personal advancement than with fighting the communists. Boehm decided to demonstrate what properly trained commandos could accomplish. He took 8 SEALs and 12 South Vietnamese into VC-controlled territory to conduct an ambush. They positioned their boats in a canal that intelligence indicated was a major VC supply route, concealed the boats with vegetation, waited 3 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours, mosquitoes, heat, boredom punctuated by terror every time a noise suggested enemy presence. At 2200 hours, 3 VC sampans came down the canal. Small boats, each carrying 4 or 5 men plus supplies, weapons, ammunition, food, medical supplies. Boehm let them come within 20 yards, then initiated the ambush. The SEALs and South Vietnamese opened fire simultaneously. The VC boats disintegrated under the concentrated fire. All 3 sank within seconds. Boehm counted at least 10 enemy killed. The survivors swam for shore, but SEAL snipers picked them off before they reached cover. The ambush lasted 45 seconds, complete success, no friendly casualties. The canal was now denied to VC forces, at least temporarily, but Boehm understood something the Pentagon did not yet grasp. Vietnam would not be won through conventional operations, big unit sweeps, search and destroy missions, body counts. None of that mattered when the enemy could melt into the jungle and replenish losses faster than Americans could inflict them. Vietnam required a different approach. Small unit operations, cutting supply lines, assassinating VC leadership, psychological operations to undermine enemy morale. The kind of unconventional warfare Boehm had been training for since Korea. He submitted reports recommending expanded SEAL operations in Vietnam. The Navy approved. SEAL teams deployed to Vietnam in increasing numbers throughout 1964 and 65. But Boehm would not be with them. In June 1964, he was promoted to lieutenant commander and reassigned to a staff position. The Navy wanted him planning operations, not conducting them. Boehm hated staff work. He submitted multiple requests to return to SEAL Team 1. All were denied. "You're too valuable as a planner. We need your expertise developing doctrine." In 1965, Boehm retired from the Navy. He was 41 years old, 23 years of service. He had created the SEALs, trained them, led them on their first combat missions, and proven that unconventional naval warfare could succeed. His retirement was not entirely voluntary. The Pentagon wanted him gone. He was too insubordinate, too willing to bypass regulations, too effective at circumventing bureaucracy. The military needed rule followers. Boehm was not that. After retirement, Boehm worked briefly as a defense contractor, then disappeared from public life. He rarely gave interviews. He refused to write a memoir for decades. He wanted no credit for creating the SEALs. But the SEALs remembered him. Every SEAL who graduated from training after 1962 was trained using methods Boehm developed. Every SEAL mission in Vietnam used tactics Boehm pioneered. Every SEAL who operated in Iraq and Afghanistan was heir to Boehm's unconventional warfare philosophy. In 2003, the Navy finally acknowledged Boehm's contributions. They invited him to speak at the SEAL Training Center in Coronado, California. Boehm was 79 years old. He walked slowly now. His hearing was damaged from decades of explosions, but his mind was sharp. He stood before 500 SEAL trainees and told them the truth. The Navy didn't want SEALs. The Pentagon thought unconventional warfare was undisciplined and ineffective. They gave me permission to create SEAL Team 1 because they expected it to fail. They expected you to fail, but you haven't failed. SEALs have conducted thousands of missions over 40 years. You've proven that small units of highly trained men can accomplish what entire battalions cannot. You've proven that unconventional thinking defeats conventional forces. The Navy teaches you to follow orders. I'm telling you to question them. Not every order is correct. Not every plan survives contact with the enemy. Your job is to complete the mission, not to follow bad orders that get your team killed. You're warriors, not bureaucrats. Not politicians, warriors. Your loyalty is to your team and your mission. Everything else is secondary. The SEALs exist because President Kennedy understood that modern warfare requires more than big ships and big guns. It requires smart, aggressive, unconventional fighters who can operate independently in enemy territory. You are those fighters. Don't ever forget what that means. The trainees gave Boehm a standing ovation later. Senior SEAL officers told him it was the most inspiring speech they had ever heard. Boehm dismissed the compliment. "I just told them the truth. That is all warriors need, the truth and the freedom to act on it." Roy Boehm died on December 30th, 2008, at age 84. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. SEALs from multiple generations attended the funeral. Teams that had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan stood alongside Vietnam veterans. Men who had never met Boehm came to honor the man who created the unit they served. The funeral service included a SEAL tradition. As Boehm's casket was lowered, 8 SEALs removed their tridents, the gold pins that identified them as SEALs, and pounded them into the wooden coffin. Each strike was a tribute. Each pin was a promise. We remember, we continue your mission, we honor your sacrifice. The SEAL who delivered the eulogy was a captain who had commanded SEAL Team 3 in Iraq. He spoke about Boehm's legacy. Commander Boehm built the SEALs on 3 principles. First, mental toughness matters more than physical strength. Second, unconventional thinking defeats conventional forces. Third, loyalty to your team supersedes loyalty to regulations. These principles remain the foundation of SEAL training today. Every SEAL who graduates from Boots learns them. Every SEAL who deploys to combat lives them. Every SEAL who dies in service of this nation embodies them. Commander Boehm never sought recognition. He refused to take credit for creating the SEALs. He always said the men did the work. He just gave them the opportunity. But we know the truth. Without Roy Boehm, there would be no SEALs. Without his willingness to break rules, challenge authority, and risk his career for what he believed was right, this community would not exist. The United States military has special operations forces because Roy Boehm proved that unconventional units could succeed where conventional forces failed. The missions we conduct today in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Pacific, all trace back to the reconnaissance mission Boehm led in Cuba in 1962. He showed us what SEALs could be. We owe him everything. Boehm's story illustrates something fundamental about military innovation. New capabilities rarely emerge from within established bureaucracies. They require mavericks willing to challenge conventional wisdom. They require leaders willing to risk their careers for ideas that seem crazy until they succeed. The Pentagon did not want SEALs. They wanted disciplined units that followed established doctrine. Boehm created something different. He created warriors who thought for themselves, who questioned orders, who found solutions when plans failed. The military bureaucracy hated this approach. But it worked. Vietnam proved it worked. SEAL teams conducted thousands of missions, killed thousands of enemy fighters, disrupted supply lines, gathered intelligence, and demonstrated that small units could dominate terrain where large forces failed. SEAL casualties were remarkably low despite operating in the most dangerous areas of Vietnam. Later conflicts confirmed SEAL effectiveness. Grenada, Panama, Kuwait, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. In every conflict since 1962, SEALs have conducted missions that conventional forces could not accomplish. They have rescued hostages, killed terrorist leaders, gathered intelligence, and conducted direct action raids deep in enemy territory. All of this traces back to Roy Boehm, the former enlisted man who became an officer, the insubordinate maverick who built an elite unit, the warrior who understood that future warfare required different thinking and different men. Boehm never regretted his approach. In his final interview, given when he was 83, he was asked if he would do anything differently. No, I built the SEALs to be warriors, not bureaucrats. I trained them to think, not to blindly follow orders. I gave them the best equipment, the best training, and the freedom to complete missions however they saw fit. The Pentagon hated that approach, but it produced the most effective special operations force in military history. The results speak for themselves. I threw people into swimming pools. I bought black market weapons. I taught my men criminal skills. I bypassed regulations constantly, and I'd do it all again tomorrow if it meant keeping my men alive and completing the mission. That is what leadership means, not following rules, protecting your men and accomplishing the mission. Everything else is just paperwork. Roy Boehm was right. The SEALs he created have conducted tens of thousands of missions over 60 years. They have saved countless lives. They have prevented terrorist attacks. They have killed enemy leaders and dismantled terrorist organizations. They have proven that unconventional warfare works. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like helps YouTube show these forgotten stories to people who need to hear them. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're sharing untold military history every week. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Australia, somewhere else. Our community stretches worldwide. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us in the comments, did you serve in the military? Do you know a veteran? What does this story mean to you? Thank you for watching, Roy. Boehm deserves to be remembered. The man who built the SEALs from nothing. The maverick who proved that breaking rules sometimes saves lives. You're helping preserve his legacy by watching, liking, and sharing. Never forget.